Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. The buzz, the momentum around this South Carolina program continues to grow heading into 2025. And look, rightfully so. I've been very vocal that this South Carolina team with a quarterback like LaNorris Sellers, that for lack of better terms, the sky's the limit for South Carolina going into 2025. But one of the most popular talking points amongst South Carolina fans, and what we've talked a lot about the last couple of weeks, is are the pass catchers around LaNorris Sellers good enough to maximize this offense in 2025? And it's a really interesting conversation because the South Carolina fans who are probably listening to this in the middle of March, the South Carolina fans who follow this program pretty dang closely, there's that quiet optimism that although there's not a ton of proven production in this room, the talent level is very high. And there's a really good chance this wide receiver room is going to shock a lot of people going into 2025. But from an outsider's perspective, you lose your leading pass catcher in Joshua Simon. You don't return a pass catcher from the 2024 season that caught for over 400 yards last year. The proven production might not be there, but the talent level is. And what I want to do here, this is going to be a little bit more of a nitty gritty conversation and go one by one through this pass catcher room and just talk about what they bring to the table. And how we're going to do it is we're going to go in the order of what I think will be the receiving production we get from these guys. And so it's a chance for all of us, because I'd love to hear from y'all in the comment section, all of us to call our shot and say, hey, who are going to be the top 5 pass catchers for the South Carolina team going into 2025? Fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, to the South Carolina fans, just want to say thank you to you guys. And whether it was talking this team in November, whether it was talking this team in the transfer portal, the amount of support y'all have shown the fellas has been absolutely amazing. Cannot thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, let it fly in the comment section. I think that's the reason I'm most excited to do this episode, is to kind of hear from y'all in the comment section in terms of the top 5 wide receivers you have for South Carolina going into 2025. Without further ado, let's get into it. Now, probably a prerequisite to this conversation, we did not include the tight ends here. Michael Smith, I predict, will play a large role in the pass catching group for the South Carolina team, but I want to stick to the wide receivers. My overarching take here is that there's a couple of things I love about this wide receiver room. One, it's fast. It is, and it's not just Nick Harbor. Like, Nick Harbor gets all the media attention in terms of speed. There's a lot of guys that go sub 10-7 in the 100-meter dash on this roster. This might be the fastest wide receiver room that you see in the country heading into 2025. And although there's not a ton of proven production, you bring in 4 blue chip true freshman wide receivers, of which a few I think will contribute immediately for South Carolina. And then finally, and this might be my favorite aspect about this room, you got guys that do a little bit of everything. And that's really important when you're trying to build out a wide receiver room. You want your big bodies. You want your burners who can work vertically down the field. You want your yards after the catch guys. You want your separators. And I feel like as we work through this wide receiver room, you see so many different kind of skill sets heading into 2025. And I think that is really important when you're trying to build a good wide receiver room. Getting into the nitty gritty now, going through these wide receivers, we have to start with Nick Harbor. And really the reason I wanted to do this episode is I've spent some time over the last couple of days going back and watching Nick Harbor specifically in that 2024 year. This kid is blossoming. And to me, he is clearly the wide receiver 1 going into the 2025 year. Why am I buying stock in Nick Harbor? It's for really a couple of different reasons. One, it's clearly going in the right direction. Number 2, Nick Harbor, this is probably the first time in his athletic career that he's not participating in track, in kind of a full-time pass catcher football player going into the 2025 year. That matters, because this is a guy, even going back to him coming out of high school, you weren't really sure what position he was going to play. I thought he was going to be a pass rusher, come off the edge when he was coming out of high school. Then he thought he'd play tight end. He settles into wide receiver. Guess what I'm trying to get at is we knew Nick Harbor, for as physically gifted as this kid is, we knew it wasn't going to be immediate impact year 1 like a guy like Dylan Stewart was, because we knew there was some development as a football player that needed to take place. You're seeing that development, kind of play out before our eyes. And it starts with the more well-rounded route tree. his freshman year, he got on the football field because he kind of had to throw this kid out there and give him a chance to impact the game. But it was pretty one dimensional. I'm big, I'm fast, I'm gonna run go balls and deep overs, and that's what I'm gonna do. Then you fast forward to 2024 and say you saw a lot more of a developed route tree. You saw him have a yards after the catch presence. You saw him run some digs. You saw him separate and run cleaner routes. We know he's big, strong, and fast. I mean, we knew that of him coming out of high school. The development as a wide receiver needed to take place, and you saw it take place specifically in the month of November, a full offseason, focusing on football. There's a really good chance that we're talking about Nick Carter going from 376 receiving yards in the 2024 year to an 1,000-yard receiver for South Carolina in 2025. And it wouldn't surprise me if we're talking about this kid as one of the best wide receivers in the country. This is not just projection, though, because you're seeing this kid get better as a football player as he continues to go through his career. Number two, and I'll Mazio Bennett. He is not necessarily the flashy guy like Nick Harbor is. As a true freshman, I was extremely impressed. And like Nick Harbor, you look at him and say, big, strong, fast, works vertically down the field really well. Well, now Mazio Bennett, to me, he might be LaNorris Sellers' safety blanket, kind of similar to how Joshua Simon was last year. Now, what makes Mazio Bennett so intriguing to me is it's not the size and speed. He's 5'11", buck 85. He's fast, but he's not Nick Harbor fast. Ain't nobody Nick Harbor fast. His feel for the position, especially as a true freshman, incredibly impressive. He knows how to separate. He knows how to sit it down in zone coverage and be a quarterback friendly pass catcher. That stuff matters. And you look at, Xavier Restrepo for Miami last year, or a guy like Julian Edelman, I think probably the best example of a wide receiver that just has really good feel to get open and be quarterback friendly. That kind of develops as you get more experience. And you saw the flashes of that from Mazio in his freshman year. I think he's going to be that guy for South. I don't think it's crazy to say he leads South Carolina in targets. Now, is he going to lead them in receiving yards? I don't think so, because I think Nick Harbor is going to be catching some explosives. But in terms of, third down conversions, in terms of total targets, I don't think it's crazy to say Mazio Bennett's going to be the guy that leads the way for South Carolina. Number three, and this is kind of where I take my big swing, and that's going to be Donovan Murphy as a true freshman. Really, I think there's a lot of South Carolina fans who follow this program and saying you're crazy. One, Donovan Murph's not going to be enrolled for spring. He's a reclass guy, so he's essentially should be a junior in high school right now, reclassified to be a senior. He's going to get to South Carolina in the summer. Why are you projecting Donovan Murphy to be the number 3 wide receiver in terms of production in 2025? It's because he's a box checker. This is a guy that is about as polished of a wide receiver as you'll see coming out of high school, and he does everything at such a high level. And he's a guy that has really good size, 6'2", buck 90, probably plays around 200 pounds when he gets to South Carolina. A guy that can work vertically, a guy that can separate, a guy that runs clean routes, can have a presence after the catch. When you do so many different things at such a high level, it's really hard to keep you off the football field. Now look at Donovan Murphy and say that's the kind of football player Donovan Murphy is. Number 3, and this is maybe one of the more intriguing wide receivers for South Carolina, that's Jared Brown. Transferred in from Coastal Carolina last year. Didn't play a huge role within South Carolina's offense in the 2024 year, but it's important to note he did start early and was a guy that we thought could bring some yards after the catch juice, and South Carolina didn't get him totally involved. There's a really good chance that some of these other younger wide receivers that we're going to talk about in just a second pass Jared Brown, but he is the most experienced purely football player at the collegiate level in the South Carolina room. And I wouldn't be surprised if Jared Brown starts the season as, kind of a key contributor in the pass catching game. What's the ceiling? It's probably not as high as some of these other younger wide receivers who are going to be nipping at his heels. That's kind of how you want the wide receiver room to look. It's how you want any position room to look. You have like proven veteran guys that are solid, and then you have young hungry dogs that are trying to kind of pass him and kind of take his reps away. That's what a competitive room is supposed to look like. Number 5, Malik Clark. You talk about speed, and again, this is such a fast wide receiver. Malik Clark, as fast as Nick Harbor is, Malik Clark's going to be one of the fastest players in all of college football, too. He's a 10.5 guy in the 100-meter dash at 6'3", buck 85. This is a guy that has a huge presence after the catch. Now, is Malik Clark the super polished route runner that Donovan Murphy is? In my opinion, no, probably not. But he is a guy that has a ton of juice after the catch. You could see South Carolina trying to get the football into Malik Clark's hands. Probably not an every down pass catcher for South Carolina, but a guy that you get on the football field and he could go create some explosive plays and game winning plays with the size speed combination that he brings to the table. Vandrevius Jacobs, kind of another, just an interesting one. I feel like you kind of forget about him. He did start week 1 for South Carolina. He was the wide receiver that was creating a lot of buzz during fall camp, coming over from Florida State. He's only going to be a redshirt sophomore. Like, yes, it was maybe a disappointing, you might say, season for him in the 2024 year. He was a redshirt freshman. Still a player that is developing, if not only physically, but as a player as well. Wouldn't forget about Vandrevius Jacobs. And the last player I'll shout out is Brian Rowe. And he was not necessarily a guy that I thought was going to be a year 1 dude, but you kind of hear the intel coming out of winter workouts, and we think Brian Rowe is going to be a ball player for South Carolina immediately as a freshman. Really interested to see what his impact is on this offense as well. And kind of the whole point of this conversation was, look, there's not a ton of proven production in this South Carolina wide receiver room. And maybe as Shane Beamer works through spring practice, maybe he says, hey, maybe we got to go get a veteran wide receiver in the portal. But you're giving your young guys that you've recruited out of high school the opportunity to go show what they can do before you go out and pay a bunch of money to a transfer portal wide receiver. And to me, that's good process. That makes sense. Really, probably outside of a couple of positions on defense, the wide receiver room in spring practice is one of the most intriguing ones because you got a dog in LaNorris Sellers. You got a really good running back in Rasul Faison. I think the offensive line, this is probably my hot take about South Carolina in general. I think this offensive line is going to be great for South Carolina in 2025. That position where it's like, can we go from good to great, which is really the conversation South Carolina's having. Is we're a damn good football team in 2024. Can we go be great and make the college football playoffs in 2025? I feel like that conversation kind of hinges on what these pass catchers do in the 2025 year. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.